Hello, I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, financial specialist Kevin Connolly explains agricultural measures in Budget 2021, how it affects your pocket, and insight into the extension and continuation to tax reliefs and schemes that can be of benefit to dairy farmers.
A fair assessment would be it's reasonably neutral, as was last year's budget. I think the budget was framed very much as a Brexit, COVID tackling budget, if you like. So the vast majority of I think there was a 17.5 billion. It was labelled as a giveaway. Most of that was to create contingencies around those two major events and how they might impact the economy in general, and obviously knock-on effects on agriculture. But there were a number of I suppose significant enough issues that related to agriculture that people were watching out for, and some of those were addressed by the Minister in his budget speech.
And just to get into specifics, there's been some changes to income tax. Kevin, can you give us some insight into this and how this will affect dairy farmers?
Yeah, well, the changes have been minor enough, Emma Louise. Over the last 2 years, there hasn't been any major shifts in income tax as regards rates and bands, and this year was no different. There was no change in the two tax rates, so the 20% and the 40% stay as is. The bands, the income tax bands, were left as is. There were some minor changes made to some of the credits. One of the credits that impacts farmers as self-employed individuals is the earned income tax credit, and that increased by €150 from 1,500 to 1,650 euro, and that was something that has been flagged over the last number of years. The intention always was to put that on a par with the credit that is given to PAYE workers, so they've achieved that now at this stage. 1,650 gives the parity with the PAYE credit, and the only other credit that was touched in any significant way was the dependent relative credit, which lifted from €70 to €245, and those credits, I suppose, are significant enough in terms of their impact, in that they're a direct deduction off the final tax bill for an individual, so they're a useful enough thing to see an improvement in. The one other, I suppose, income tax related tax, if you like, is the universal social charge, and that was tweaked a small bit. There was an increase in one of the middle bands there, the 2% band. It was raised by €203, I think. So that again will have a minor impact in a positive way on income tax bills.
And speaking of positive impacts on farmers' income, there was an increase in the flat rate farmer VAT, and this has increased from 5.4% to 5.6%. Now, when we hear of increase in VAT rates, we often associate it with being negative, but this is a positive. Can you explain exactly what that means and the impact for farmers?
Yeah, exactly as you described. Sometimes when you hear any tax rate going up, it's normally seen as a bad thing, but this is actually of benefit to farmers. The flat rate VAT for farmers is basically a top up on all their sales. So whenever a farmer sells product, so take for example a dairy farmer selling milk to a processor, and if that farmer is non-VAT registered, so he's not registered for VAT, the flat rate addition is added on by the processor. So it's that what was 5.4% of an addition pre the budget is now going to be 5.6% actually from the 1st of January. It kicks in 1st of January 2021, and that will be an additional 0.2% of a top up on every euro of sales basically that farmer makes. And what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to compensate a non-VAT registered farmer for the fact that he or she can't claim back any of the VAT that they've actually incurred on buying inputs for the farm that have a VAT component to them. Now, most of the major purchases that a farmer would be taking on in terms of feed and fertilizer are zero VAT rated, but something like sprays and so on, where there would be a VAT element, and if a non-VAT registered farmer buys sprays, he can't claim back the VAT. This flat rate addition in the VAT, this 5.6% from the 1st of January next, is supposed to partly compensate him for that.
So as we say, this flat rate VAT is having a positive impact on farmer income from the 1st of January 21. Then looking to another aspect of VAT, the higher rate of VAT that we pay for products, the 23%, that's also decreasing. So that's decreasing by 2%. What sort of impact will that have? Like, what sort of products will that affect in terms of what we would see dairy farmers purchasing?
Yeah, well, that 2% drop in the VAT rate from 23 to 21 actually came in last September as a response, I think, mainly to the COVID, the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, and it was, I think, it had an expiry date of around February of next year. Now it's hard to know whether it will, whether the plan is still to just maintain that. 21% until February, or whether it's going to go back up again to 23. But the type of products, again, just as I said before, something like sprays, tools and so on that a farmer would buy, small items that would be bought for the farm would be subject to that 23% or 21% rate as it is now. So any reduction in the VAT that's applied on inputs will have some impact on a reduced purchase price for farmers that are incurring those costs.
And looking then and turning our attention to schemes and reliefs that farmers can avail of, I guess, a lot of them there's no change and there's a continuation, but there were some that were due to expire at the end of this year that have indeed been continued. One of those would be the consanguinity tax. Can you give us some information, explain what exactly that means for farmers?
Yeah, the consanguinity relief was a relief that was targeted at the stamp duty, and stamp duty is as most of your listeners will know, is a tax, if you like, on land purchase mainly, and the stamp duty rate at the moment on purchases of land is at 7.5%. It went up in last year's budget from 6 to 7.5. So it's quite a significant tax, and it's levied on the purchase price of land. And what consanguinity relief does is that it helps relieve or cut down that stamp duty cost, if you like, or tax, where land is being transferred between related parties. So between father and son, parent to children, parents to, or uncles to nephews. Those kind of transfers where there's a blood relative involved or blood relation between the two parties, consanguinity relief can come in there and reduce the effective stamp duty rate on that transfer, because the stamp duty affects not only purchases, it also affects lifetime transfers between parties of land. So it will effectively reduce the rate of stamp duty from 7.5% to 1%. So that's a significant saving. Now that consanguinity relief has been in place for a number of years, but it was due to expire at the end of this year, and there was quite a bit of nervousness and speculation that perhaps it mightn't be renewed, and that would be a significant blow to farmers that particularly say new entrants that were expecting to have land transferred to them, to be hit with a stamp duty bill of 7.5% could be a major draw on cash flow in the early stages of their farming career. So thankfully that consanguinity relief was further extended until the end of 2023. But just by way of a little health warning, if you like, over that relief, while it wasn't mentioned in the budget, it was kind of buried in some of the supplementary documentation around the budget. There is a plan to review consanguinity relief during the coming year, with a possibility that an upper age limit will be imposed on the age of the transferor who's party to the transfer of 67. And now that was in place back a number of years ago, and it was removed. But there seems to be an appetite there to maybe relook at that again. So again, for people out there that are speculating around completing a transfer in the next year or so, they should keep that in mind and keep an eye on the press to see exactly what happens with that rate. Possibly there won't be any major change in it, I think, until budget of next year.
And looking then to other reliefs and taxes, we have our stock relief. There's also schemes like the farm consolidation. We've capital acquisitions and capital gains tax. Any major changes there, or all in order as standard from last year, Kevin?
Pretty standard, Emma Louise. No major change in the two other capital taxes as they're called. The capital acquisitions tax, which affects gifts and inheritances. There was no change in either the rate, which stays at 33%, or the tax-free thresholds. There was a bit of a lift in the tax-free threshold for parent to child last year, but nothing was done this year. There was a little bit of speculation that those thresholds would be further increased, but there was no changes made to either the rate or the thresholds of capital acquisitions tax. And in relation to capital gains tax, no significant changes there. The rate stays at 33%. There was a minor change to the operation of capital gains tax entrepreneurial relief, but nothing major. One of the, I suppose, other taxes that kind of crosses over there between capital gains and stamp duty is consolidation relief, farm consolidation relief. Now that has a kind of a partner tax on the capital gains tax side. There's capital gains tax restructuring relief, and then stamp duty consolidation relief. And both of those reliefs look at the same type of transaction, where a farmer is looking to consolidate his or her holding by getting rid of parcels of land that are further away from the main holding and replacing them with parcels that are closer to the main holding, thereby reducing the distance between parcels. And there was no change to either of those reliefs, either the capital gains tax restructuring relief or the stamp duty consolidation relief. The only change, if you like, was that stamp duty consolidation relief was due again to expire at the end of this year, and it's been further extended to the end of 2022. And that expiry date brings it in line with the expiry date that's already in place for the capital gains tax restructuring relief. So because they work in tandem, it made sense to have them finishing at the same time, so that they can be hopefully renewed at the same time, because they're quite useful reliefs to have in place for farmers that are restructuring their holdings.
And looking at that restructuring and consolidation that you talk about, Kevin, what is the process there? I know that there are some steps involved in order to achieve that and avail of the relief for farm consolidation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the terms and conditions are set down by the Department of Finance and in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture. There's a set of terms and conditions there, and the terms and conditions document, I would expect, will be updated in the next number of weeks. I suppose the conditions around it really are that you have to have a reduction distance between parcels, and that the sale and the purchase have to take place within a 24-month period of each other, as well. So there's a time limit there between disposing of a parcel of land and reinvesting in another suitable parcel. I suppose ourselves in Teagasc are involved in certifying that the transaction meets the terms and conditions around distance reduction and so on. So we have to issue a certificate, and to do that, applicants do have to submit maps of their holdings showing parcels of land that they're getting rid of and the parcels of land that they're replacing those with, so that we can see that that complies with the conditions. But I mean, the actual reliefs are useful. While it does take a little bit of work by the applicant to gather together that information between themselves and usually their solicitors involved, the savings in terms of tax, in terms of capital gains tax, and in terms of stamp duty, normally makes it well worth our while in doing that.
And looking then to another good news story from a dairy perspective, there's been an extension to TAMS grant, which will have a positive impact on investment on dairy farms. Can you give us more information on this, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of the areas that I suppose everybody in the farming sector looks to on budget day, just to make sure that the funding for some of these schemes is maintained or continued, or hopefully maybe even increased. And there was a little bit of worry around some of these schemes, particularly where we are in relation to CAP, where the CAP renegotiation process is kind of stalled at this stage because a number of different factors, and COVID-19 is one of them. But thankfully, in the budget, the Minister for Agriculture came out with a press release just re-emphasising that it was his intention to maintain the TAMS. So I think there's 80 million there has been ring fenced to look after existing TAMS applications, and also to allow for maybe further funding, and some of the other schemes have also been funded, again to carry over that period between the old CAP and the new CAP agreement. Some of the environmental measures have also been kind of emphasised, as well as there was a lot of speculation around a new REPS type scheme, and while a new scheme in itself wasn't announced or hasn't been announced yet, there's an intention there to set up a pilot program for a REPS type scheme with funding for that, and some of the carbon tax related taxes that were increased in the budget have been again ring fenced for some of those.
And I guess, from a TAMS perspective, like that, again, as we say, has a positive impact, particularly from a dairy perspective, where people are investing in milking facilities, sheds, and also looking at other things like retrofitting slurry tanks or buying new slurry tanks with the low emission slurry spreading. They're some of the key technologies that farmers will use those grants for. You mentioned the agri-environmental type schemes, and we see there's a continuation in things like GLAS, and also then money ring fenced for REPS and the organic schemes. And I guess this is probably a clear indication of the commitment of the government and the Department of Agriculture to the environment.
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, and particularly with the Greens there in government now, they're quite obviously keen on getting the organic sector boosted and some of these environmental related measures funded to be able to encourage farmers to look at those options seriously.
And I know the information is fairly sketchy at this point, but there is some money set aside for calf weighing for dairy calf to beef. Have you any more insight than, I suppose, just the headline on that, Kevin?
Not an awful lot, Louise. I think the figure there of 10 million has been earmarked for this calf weighing scheme. I think it's going to be diverted or targeted at beef farmers that are taking dairy bred calves to rear. So there'll be some kind of an incentive there, or funding there to assist them, maybe from the point of view of setting up their facilities, or actually rewarding them for taking on these calves. So it'll be diverted to I think towards the rearer, but I mean that'll have knock-on effects through the system as well, and in the dairy farmer that's selling those calves on, if the rearers are there and incentivized to take on those calves.
And then looking to carbon tax, and you've briefly mentioned this, and I guess the increase in carbon tax covers a multitude. It's going to affect every aspect of, I guess, the fossil fuels that we're using. Could you give us insight into how you expect this will impact on farmers?
Yeah, well, I suppose the carbon tax took a number of different forms, and again, this was well flagged in the budget well in advance that there was going to be significant moves on carbon tax. I mean, the most immediate one that kicked in on the night of the budget actually was the increase in the cost of a ton of carbon up to 33.50 a ton, and that put an extra 2.5 cents, I think, on litre of diesel and 2 cents on a litre of petrol, and that's I think came in on midnight on budget day. So those carbon tax impacts on fuel, and it's only going to go the one way over the next. I think there's an intention there. The current rating per tonne is 33.50 a tonne after that increase, and the intention is to push it further upwards over the next number of budgets. So it's only going to start to continue to increase. Now there is a rebate scheme in place there for farmers that are buying green diesel, obviously to run farm machinery, and that presumably will still be in place for this increase. But the other angles around carbon impacts of carbon on this budget were flagged as regards the VRT changes and motor tax changes, and there's been there's going to be a major overhaul on the VRT system, the vehicle registration tax system, to I suppose more heavily penalise cars that are seen as more pollutant, and to reduce the VRT element on electric and hybrid cars, to try and encourage the people to look at those as serious options. And also in relation to motor tax, I think the minister in his speech talked about a new motor tax table as well, in terms of the ratings that we'll be paying for our annual motor tax in our cars, and that'll be more closely connected with the new emissions targets.
And I guess, as you say, from a carbon tax perspective, it's only going one way, and that's that it is increasing. But I suppose to take note from a green diesel perspective, there is a rebate scheme in place that is expected to continue. But I guess that those things will be ironed out before the finance bill. I suppose finally then, something that you mentioned at the outset in relation to the overall budget is that there is a contingency, or a recovery fund, to protect the overall Irish economy based on the type of Brexit we're going to have, and particularly if there's a no deal Brexit, and also I guess from protecting the economy against COVID, and depending on how long it's going to continue. I suppose, where is farming and agriculture on the agenda within that recovery fund? Do you see that? Is there much ring fenced for farming?
Not that I've seen in anything I've seen in the literature so far relating to the budget, Emma Louise. It just mentioned the fact that I think it's a 3.4 billion recovery fund, and it's kind of a contingency that's sitting there if and when we need it, and it'll all very much depend on the way the Brexit negotiations go over the next weeks and months, as to where that will be diverted to and how it will be drawn down. I think because agriculture and the fisheries industry are so vulnerable to a no deal Brexit, it's a fair assumption, I think, to make that a good share of that should be diverted towards the industry. How that's going to be fed down to primary agriculture, to farmer level, it's very difficult to say at this stage.
And I guess, look, we are extremely vulnerable, not alone within the dairy sector. I suppose we're not as badly affected as, say, the likes of the beef sector, but at the same time, a lot of product is going across the water to the UK, and we are taking cognizance of that. Thank you, Kevin. I think we've got a clear picture of the effects of the recent budget in terms of how it's going to affect our pockets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Kevin Connolly for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.